Hi, how you doing? Justin here. Today we're going to be checking out pattern 3 of the minor pentatonic scale and also where the blue note fits into that particular scale pattern. Now, before we get to a close-up and check it out properly, there's a couple of things I want to mention. One of them is really important, which is the fingering for this scale changes a lot. So I'm going to give you one that I think kind of works for most people most of the time if you're playing the scale up and down. But depending on the lick that you're playing or how you come into the pattern, you're almost certainly going to find yourself using different fingers on the notes in this particular pattern, more so than you will in other, like box 1 of the pentatonic. It's fairly consistent. This one, it really varies a lot. It's a very interesting pattern, quite one of my favorites really, because it's got lots of kind of notes that you can add in later on that make it particularly hip, and there's some really interesting string bends you can get around it and stuff like that. But so you want to think of this one as a frame, like try and see the notes as a visual guide to this particular area of the fretboard based around the root note. So remembering where the root note is a really big deal. Generally I recommend that you start and end on the lowest root note just as an exercise, but the root note on this particular scale based on that string 2 is also a pretty kind of key indicator. You're going to find yourself in that area of the neck quite a lot. That's one of the kind of the sweet spots, if you like, of this particular pattern. So do pay particular attention to that. The general idea, we're going to look at the scale first of all with a general fingering, then we're going to look at alternate fingerings, then we're going to look at the way you might bend and curl some of the notes from this particular scale. So let's get to a close-up and check out how to play it. Okay, there's the scale up and down. We're starting and finishing here on the lowest root note, which is the note A, okay, 12th fret of the 5th string. Moving on to the 4th string, we're going to have the 10th fret and the 12th fret, using fingers 1 and 3. Then on the 3rd string, we have the 9th fret and the 12th fret, still using fingers 1 and 3. Then on the 2nd string, we have the 10th fret and the 13th fret, still using fingers 1 and 3. And on the thinner string, we have the 10th fret and the 12th fret, still using fingers 1 and 3. Notice a little pattern here. Moving back down, we'd hit the 10th fret again, then onto the 2nd string, 13th fret, 10th fret. Onto the 3rd string, 12th fret, 9th fret. Onto the 4th string, 12th fret, 10th fret. Onto the 5th string, 12th fret, 10th fret. And onto the thicker string, 12th fret, 10th fret, back to the 12th, 10th fret on the 5th string, and finishing there on the root note at the 12th fret of the 5th string, okay? I think it's really important that you start and finish on the lowest root note when you practice scales. It really helps you get the sound of your scale correctly in your ear. If you start on other notes, you can it's easy to hear the scale in the wrong way, okay? Even better, you can practice it over a backing track if you like. But so next stage would just be practicing the scale really nice and slowly. Just try and keep it even, try and keep it clean. Make sure there's no other strings ringing out while you're playing. Working on your string muting a little bit perhaps, if you've done any of that before. Probably alternate picking, so down, up, 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 down. Okay, so really work on playing that nice and evenly first of all. Now let's look at some of the alternative fingering. So on these bottom 3 strings, you're probably going to be using fingers 1 and 3 most of the time. But as soon as we reach into this stretch is not too bad for me, but for some of you, you might find it a little awkward. And when I first learned this scale, I definitely learned it using fingers 1 and 4, 1 and 4, and then 1 and 3. Particularly here, it looks logical, doesn't it, to use 3, 1, 4, 1. 3's already there, ready to go if you want to use 3, 1, but it wouldn't be difficult to use 4th finger there as well. Okay, now this is a root note, so it's really important as well that you start to recognize that this is a root note as well, especially if you've been used to playing in box 2. You can slide your first finger into that and now you're in that box 3. Okay, so it's a big deal that you start to see that as being a root note as well. I do, like I said, recommend that you start and finish on the lowest root note for practicing the scale, but practicing scale shouldn't be what you're doing most of the time. You want to be working on licks and vocabulary, and therefore it can be very helpful to keep your eye on this one as being the root note as well, okay, the 10th fret of the 2nd string. So let's look at a couple of the other alternate fingerings that you're very likely to come across with this pattern. Any of these kind of licks where you're playing a note here on the 3rd string and then playing a note on that string, you could use 3, 4, 1 here, which is kind of a fingering that I've explained before, but very often I find my 2nd finger on that one, particularly if I'm doing a bend here, because it's a great note to bend in this particular pattern. You're going to find a lot of Eric Clapton-y kind of lines doing that as well, 2nd finger on that note. You can see that I'd use my 3rd finger as soon as I start moving down. Straight away I've changed what fingering is going to be playing that note rather, within the same lick. Now this note as well, here look, I've used the 2nd finger on this note, even though I said to you almost certainly you're going to use 1 and 3 for that. If you've hit that note and you want to play that note next, you're going to have to use 2nd finger because it's just uncomfortable and awkward and not worth it. You use 3rd finger, 2nd finger, and then have to reach over again. It's an odd little pattern this, because there's lots of times. Now look, I've moved the 2nd finger over. So one thing that I would definitely recommend is trying a backing track on and just trying to think of these dots as places that you can put a finger. Don't let yourself get hung up on the idea of having to use a particular finger. A good breaker for that can just be using 1 finger. Okay, just all using your 1st finger there. It'll really help you start to see where the dots are and start to get less worried about what fingers are playing them. Okay, that can be quite an important kind of part of the game, is breaking out of having a set fingering for every pattern that you learn. So let's have a look now at where the blue notes are in this particular pattern. So it's the flat 5, if you remember from pattern 2. We had it there, so that's it, the note E flat. Now it's really comfortable here, using fingers 3, 2, 1. Okay, so on the thinner string. Okay, really, really nice little, very convenient location. It's one of the sweet spots there if you got your finger on that root note. Okay, really nice little easy access there for the flat 5. Now the other flat 5, if we continue down the scale, is here, either 1st finger moving back, which is kind of awkward usually because you're already kind of backwards in that shape, so to go, it's just, you can do it, but it's a little bit awkward. More common is to use it here from the 3rd finger on the 4th string on the 12th fret. And know that the blue note is the 13th fret. So okay, and it's also here on the 11th fret on the thicker string. Hopefully you know that the 2 outside strings, same notes, 2 octaves apart. Okay, so if you know that, you can also. Yeah, it is quite a nice, it's not used as much, but it is quite an accessible and kind of a usable place, that one, because it falls within the pattern easily. Okay, the next thing to check out is the notes that we can curl on. Now hopefully again you remember from pattern 2 was the note C. The flat third is the one that you can put this little bend on. It's not a proper bend, just a quarter tone, remember? So that note there this time is the note C, it's here. Okay, now the kind of the problem with this one is because it's with the third finger, you feel like you want to do a big bend all the time there, but do remember that it's really nice to have a little bend there. Don't always feel that you have to do a big bend there. We'll talk about that in a second. But so that's the note C, where you already saw that a little earlier in one of the demos, but first finger in the 10th fret of the 4th string is a really nice. Okay, so be aware anytime you hit that note there with the first finger on the 4th string or the 3rd finger there on the 2nd string, you can get away with that little quarter tone bend. Now when it comes to string bending, the most obvious one here is the note C. Bending at a tone bend is a really lovely, really common kind of a phrase in this particular pattern. And I've just shown you the second one as well, which is the 12th fret on the 3rd string, because you're bending up to the root note. So there are a few other string bends here that can be really effective that are a little bit more advanced, but I'll give you a quick rundown of what they are anyway. The first one, the thinner string here, can be a little bit tricky one for people, kind of intermediate level guitar players. If you want to bend this one to another note in the minor pentatonic scale, the next note is here, which is a minor 3rd, which is very possible. I love the sound of it actually, to tell the truth, but it's quite a big bend, okay? You've probably only so far done tone bends, at least if you stuck to my course. And that note, the 6th, it does sound pretty good most of the time, to be fair, but if you want to stay within the scale shape, that one needs to be a minor 3rd, okay? So 3 frets. Okay, if you want to do just a tone bend, that also sounds pretty cool, but it's not in the scale, so you have to use your ears to judge whether it's going to work well or not. You don't want to do a semitone bend there, that's not going to sound good really. So on the thinner string, you've got the big 1.5 tone bend, or a tone bend. So this one here, you're generally going to do a tone bend. Okay, but another nice little trick here is bending this note, a semitone, to hit that note. Okay, so instead of always playing that one, okay, very often I play that note, the B, bend it up to the C. Okay, really nice little tasteful trick that you might want to have a little explore of. Now this one is another one I like to do a little bend on, is the this note here, it's the 4th. We did already discuss the sliding up to the blue note, but remember you can always bend that as well. Okay, they're generally the notes that you could bend. Bending these thicker strings is not particularly well, of course you can always do it, you know, it's worth this note, the next note you want to bend to is a C. Okay, but whether you're going to really use that in the real world is unlikely, but by all means experiment. I just wanted to give you a look at a couple of the more common and some of the less common but interesting bending positions. So there are a few things that you want to be working on now. The first one is trying to build a visual pattern of this scale in your mind. A really good thing that you can be doing is trying to remember what the scale pattern looks like in your mind with your eyes closed, even away from the guitar neck. So just close your eyes and imagining your third finger there on the fifth string, and then look at the, okay, then it was first finger, third finger directly underneath it, then first finger moved back a fret, and then the third finger was in the same one, it's that root note, and then the first finger moved back forward, the third finger moved up a fret, you know, like that. Try and imagine it, imagine what shape it makes, and really build a visual picture in your mind. It can definitely be helpful to practice the scales with one finger, whether it's all your first finger or all your third finger, because that kind of forces you out of the finger memory and makes you really think about what the shape is. And partly what you're trying to do here, I think, is build a relationship between the sound and the shape. So if I play it in my mind, I can hear what the notes sound like. So that's part of the thing that you want to be doing when you're practicing the scale, is not just thinking of it as a finger exercise, but try and develop in your musical mind a relationship between where you put your fingers and what it sounds like. Okay, it's getting a little bit deeper, but that's really what you should be aiming for when you're practicing scales, is trying to get that relationship between where your fingers go and the sound that comes out when you put your fingers there. Okay, it takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of time, but that should be the kind of the goal. Once you feel confident with this pattern, a nice thing to do would be to use your licks and phrases that you know in patterns 1 and 2, and then just move into 3 and explore the pattern a little bit. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking at some specific licks and phrases that you might like to try out, but it definitely doesn't hurt to try things out on your own. You should always be trying to explore a bit and just find out where your fingers take you and what feels comfortable and where it's good, and where, you know, you might come up with some other stuff that I haven't talked about, because there's, you know, I've only just scratched the surface here with you, because there's so many different layers that you can start to explore with these different things, and so many different sounds and textures to get into. It's a very, very cool little pattern, this. I like it a lot. One other thing that I'll just mention, if you are into the cage system, or you've explored that kind of thing, do remember this fits around the C shape. Okay, so the root note, having the root note with the little finger there on the fifth string, that's the kind of the major chord shape that fits around the scale. So it can be definitely worth kind of having a look at how those two things fit together. Of course, that was a major chord, and we're talking about the minor pentatonic, so it's not really going to line up exactly, but it's worth kind of noting where the fingers are in relation to the root note. So I always think of C shape as being the root note on the fifth string, and most of the chord shape is behind the little finger. Okay, so it's behind the root note. It's just like an overlay thing to do with this framework idea. For those of you that have looked at the cage system, if you haven't looked at the cage system, I wouldn't worry about doing it yet. I think it's almost better to have not done it. But if you have done it, then do check out the relationship there. I think that can be quite helpful. And as I said, a really good thing that between now and the next week, or the next lesson, you really want to spend a little bit of time just exploring the scale. Don't be in a hurry to just suddenly jump onto the next lesson. You know, to take it, I would say, at least a week where you're doing your 5-10 minutes a day practice, and just explore the scale. Try out the different fingerings, see how they feel to you. Make sure that you're aware of where that blue note is and how that might get incorporated into the rest of what you play. And hopefully you'll join me for the next lesson. We'll check out some of these licks and phrases that you might want to incorporate into your playing and listen out for when you're doing your transcribing. So hope you join me for that. I'll see you for plenty more lessons very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.